right, we're getting just a minute to get all this everywhere it needs to be on Facebook. Then as soon as we get all this going, we will start our class. So bear with me momentarily. All right. I think I've got everything where it needs to be. I appreciate everyone joining us tonight. As I said in our devotional, if you watched that, we will be in Exodus chapter 5. As soon as I can get that brought up where it needs to be. All right. All right. So you remember last time we got into talking about the Exodus. We were in Exodus 4, where Moses received his call from God, and Moses went to Israel. Remember we talked about the 5 excuses he gave, and then finally he has no choice but to go because God countered all of his excuses. God stopped him from having any kind of objections, and so Moses finally has to go, and he agrees to go. Remember, God gives him 3 signs. He goes and he shows those 3 signs to the Israelite elders. They hear his news. You remember we ended this chapter by saying, our last chapter, by saying that the people rejoiced. The people were excited. The people were happy. The people were praising God and worshiping God for what they had done, or what he had done, or what he had promised to do. And so now we get into chapter 5 to see how this story unfolds. And what's interesting about Exodus 5 is if you go from this from a blank perspective of not knowing how the story goes, you can see where the Israelites may have trouble coming forward because God doesn't necessarily act in the way or the quickness that the people would expect. And that's sort of what we see in Exodus 5, is that there's some delay in God actually getting Israel out. And that delay has a purpose. Now, whether or not the people of Israel believe that purpose, they understand that purpose, we're going to see that. I don't know they actually did, especially with the reaction here at the first. But we're going to just see how this goes. And like I said last week, it's very interesting. God tells Moses, I want you to go get my people and get them out of Egypt. But God doesn't never tell Moses it's going to be an easy job. He doesn't ever tell Moses it's going to be a short job. As a matter of fact, we don't know a time scale or time frame of this, but most Bible scholars put this from Exodus 5 to about Exodus 15 of leaving Egypt to be around a year. And that's how long this is going to take, because there's some time with these plagues and time with these interactions between Pharaoh. It's not like it just bam, bam, bam happened. There's actually some delay here in these events occurring. And this is going to test Israel. God told them he would deliver them. God told them he would save them. But the question is on whose time scale. And we're going to find out the thing about the Bible is that God doesn't honor man's time. God doesn't pay attention to what man thinks, what man believes, how man thinks time and God's time ought to work. God does his own time. And God does it when he feels that he knows it needs to be done. So that's what we're going to see here in Exodus 5. So we're going to start Exodus 5. We're going to look at verse 1. It says, afterward Moses went and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I shall obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with sword. So I'll stop there in these first 4 verses, or 3 verses. Moses and Aaron get an audience with Pharaoh. This is a very interesting question that arises here of how are they able to get such an easy audience with Pharaoh? We're going to see that apparently this Pharaoh was more of a hands-on Pharaoh. When people had an issue, there was a problem, we're going to see Pharaoh taking a major upfront role, because we're going to see 3 or 4 people come to Pharaoh himself. Usually some pharaohs would do this by sending the men or sending the people to someone else, and basically what we see today, bureaucracy. But here Moses and Aaron come on behalf of Israel to Pharaoh. And they come to him, and notice they say, thus says the Lord. Now that Lord there is usually all capitalized. This is the word for Yahweh, the word of the name of God. Basically naming this God, the God of Israel. He says, let my people go. Now it's very interesting. They say, thus says the Lord. This is prophet language. When we read the prophets, we'll see, thus says the Lord, thus says the Lord. This was a statement that preceded a direct commandment by God, and something that people paid attention to. And so he begins with this formula, thus says the Lord, let my people go. And notice that the command, or the request here, is that they may go hold a feast. Go hold a feast to me in the wilderness. They want to journey off into the wilderness to have this feast. Then you notice verse 2, this Pharaoh is savvy. And again, we're going to see this Pharaoh not be challenged in that he says, who is the Lord? Who is Yahweh that I shall obey his voice and let Israel go? Because you see, this is a major thing for Pharaoh. Pharaoh is questioning God. Now, this is very interesting. You remember chapter 3, the second excuse of Moses was that one was, who am I that I should go? And number 2 is, who are you? Who are you, God? And he said, they'll question that. He said, Israel questioned it. Now Pharaoh questions it, says, who is God? Who is the Lord? And this is only another idea here that Pharaoh is introducing, is because Pharaoh himself, by the Egyptians, is viewed as a god. And so this is almost a god of the Hebrews, or it is the God of the Hebrews going up against the God of Egypt, one of the gods of Egypt. And Pharaoh sees this as a way of them invoking their Lord's name, but they're trying to say that their Lord has more power over the Pharaoh Lord. And so that's why Pharaoh says, who is this Lord that I should obey his voice? What good is this God to me? Now, again, you've got to understand another aspect of their lifestyle, the pagan lifestyle, was that these gods, and this was all the gods in the pantheon of all the different religions and all the different ideas, these pantheistic gods that had so many different gods they worship, they viewed their gods as being locally confined. They viewed their God as a God of an area. Here, the God of Israel was the God of the land in Israel, the land north, not here, not in Egypt. And so Pharaoh says, I don't know this Lord. I don't know this God. And he says, moreover, I will not let Israel go. What Pharaoh's doing is he is directly opposing God's command with his own command as God. When he says, your God says, let you go, I say, as me, God, no, I will not let you go. I will not let Israel out of Egypt. And then Moses and Aaron begin to beg Pharaoh to plead for his mercy, and says, please, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. God has come to us, and he's told us to go to this sacrifice, and he tells us to go to this sacrifice lest he fall upon us. And they say that we need to go out and go to worship our God, or he's going to cause problems. He's going to cause a pestilence upon us, or he's going to come at us with the sword. And the other idea would be here that they're warning Pharaoh that if their God punishes them, then there's a good chance he's going to get the Egyptians too. He's not just going to hit one area and go to the other. And notice they say, let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness. What Moses and Aaron are asking for is basically a 2-week break. Let us go worship our God for 2 weeks. 3 days journey. They would travel 3 days out of Egypt into Canaan or into the Sinai Mount Horeb area is what they're basically asking for. And the reason they do that is because the Israelite sacrifices were viewed as being an abomination to the Egyptians. They didn't like the way the animals that the Egyptians or the Israelites did. Again, they would offer lambs and bulls, and that was the bulls were like sacred animals to the Egyptians, I believe, and the lambs were not. Very highly looked upon in Israel or Egypt, remember, because they didn't like shepherds. So this is why they asked for a 3 days journey, to be able to get away from Egypt. Now, a 3 days journey would have been probably 45 to 60 miles away. In the ancient world, if you were traveling, you could travel about 15 to 20 miles a day. That was typical. And we think about that. I've often thought about that of compared to us. And that's a major feat to be able to go that far just by walking. That was how most of them did. They could walk 15 to 20 miles a day. So this is how far they're wanting to go. They're wanting to go not far, but a little bit away. And they're going to, I said 2 weeks, because they're probably going to spend a week. Every feast we read about in the Bible usually lasts for a week. There's a few days, but most of these kind of travel somewhere and have a feast. This is it. This is a worship that will last for about a week. There's some other feasts that are mentioned later in the Israelite, in the law of Moses, that they're going to take, that they have to come to Jerusalem and partake of. They're going to be using this same word of the sacrifice or the feast to God. They last for a week, and they were feasts that required Israel to come back to Jerusalem once it's established by the time of the kings. So this is what they beg him do, that this is our God is demanding this. Let us go and worship him a short time, a 2-week period, and then we'll be back. Now, that's all we're asking for, is to go with just a few times. Well, Pharaoh hears them say this, and then he knows verse 4, but the king of Egypt, Pharaoh said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. And Pharaoh said, behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens. The same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as in the past. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the number of bricks that they made in the past, you shall impose on them. For you shall by no means reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry, let us go and offer a sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on the men, that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words. So notice what Pharaoh does here in verse 4. He goes to Moses, he hears Moses' question, his reply, and he says, why do you want to take the people away from their work? Pharaoh realizes the vital role that the Israelites are playing. He realizes how important they are to the Egyptians, to their lifestyle, to what they're building. And he says, why do you want to take them from their work? We need them here. We need their work. We can't do without them. And then he tells them, get back to your burdens. Go back to work. Go back and do what you're supposed to be doing. Basically, this is Pharaoh dismissing them, telling them, you don't need to be here. You're lazy. And that's what we're going to see over and over again in this passage. Pharaoh is going to call the Israelites lazy for wanting this time to go worship their God. And then after this, in verse 5, there's sort of an aside of not necessarily speaking to Moses and Aaron, but maybe he speaks to the others. He could speak to Moses and Aaron. We really don't know here because he says, behold, the people of the land are now many. And again, the question of the people of the land is who's he talking about? He's talking about the Egyptians, the Israelites. Most people think this is the Israelites. When he talks about the people of the land, and this could mean the poverty-stricken ones. The ones who are peasants, the ones who are lower. And he says the people of the land are many, and you make them rest from their burdens. Basically, he says there's so many there that they're not working that hard anyway. You're getting them a time of rest, and how dare you give them time of rest? And in verse 6, we see Pharaoh again not willing to bargain with them, but honestly putting more on them. Because he says, and this next little part of report repeated about 3 or 4 times in this chapter, in that Pharaoh gives this command that you shall no longer, he says, no longer give the people straw and to make bricks. Now, this tells us what the Israelites have been doing. The Israelites have been collecting or making the bricks that they would use. Now, what they would do to make bricks is they would have to go to the well and get water. Then they would take that water and make a mud with it. And they would get the mud to a certain consistency. And when they got the mud to a certain consistency they wanted to, they had wooden blocks that they would put the mud inside of. And then they would flip those blocks over and let that mud and basically pull that wooden block out of the mud, and it would create a brick. And in that mud, you would have to put straw because the straw would help the mud stay together. It would have to help it to last. And so then they put these wooden boxes over, they pull the mud out of it, and it would have a brick, and it would lay there in the sun, and it would bake. And then after a few hours or a day or so, it would be hard enough they could pick it up and move it, and they go build with it. So this is what they're doing. They're having to get the water, they're mixing it with the mud, they're mixing that with the straw, then they're putting in these boxes and making these bricks. And now Pharaoh says, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take away part of what we're giving them. We're going to take away the straw. So now he's adding to their load. They're going to have to now go and get their own straw. What this is going to do is this is going to add another step in the process. It's going to make this process even longer. But you notice the next part, verse 8, but the number of bricks that they made in the past, you shall impose on them. They're not going to reduce the number of bricks. Pharaoh basically says they are, and he goes on to say they're idle or they're lazy. Some translations will say they're lazy. He's going to say, well, they're lazy and they want to go. They cry, let us go and offer sacrifice to our God. He says, so what we're going to do is we're going to give them more work. And this is what the idea is. They're going to have to go gather their own straw in order to put in this mud to create these bricks. But they're still going to have to keep up the output they were doing before. So basically, Pharaoh's giving them pretty much an impossible job. There's no way they could harvest the straw, get it here, get it in the brick, make the brick, and have the bricks ready by the end of the day that they were before. And Pharaoh says he does this because they cry out. They're lazy. And then he knows verse 9, let heavier work be laid on the men that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words. So here's what Pharaoh's doing. This is a very interesting statement by Pharaoh. He says, put more work on the men so they can work and they can work harder, and then they can pay no regard to the lying words. Basically, they won't listen to Moses and Aaron because here Pharaoh's saying they're lying. He says their God didn't say that. Their God didn't tell them to do any of this. They're just making this up. They're just saying this so that they can be lazy. They can get a vacation, if you will. And so Pharaoh says, this is what my command is. This is what's going to happen. And then we go from there to verse 10. It says, so the taskmasters and the foremen of the people went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go and get your straw yourself, wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced in the least. So the people were scattered throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. Now, notice an interesting correlation here in verse 10. Some have said there may be a parallel idea, or maybe the taskmasters were told exactly what to say, because you notice their response is, thus says Pharaoh. You remember back in let's go back to verse 1, where the first words we see here are, thus says the Lord. Thus says the Lord, and then what God said. Here in verse 10, we see, thus says Pharaoh. This is maybe Pharaoh, and probably is Pharaoh doing a play on those words to say, well, you say your God has power. Well, I'll show you my power. And again, he tells them that they won't be given straw, but they got to go find it themselves. And so you notice verse 12, they scatter throughout the land of Egypt. Now, some have asked whether or not this is literal or maybe hyperbole. Not they had to go all over Egypt, but the idea was that this wasn't an easy task. They were working pretty hard to get this straw together anyway, get these bricks made that Pharaoh was demanding. And now to take away this straw has put them in an even more terrible bind. some of you know, and some of you have. If you haven't, you can talk to somebody. But if you work at a plant or you work at in an assembly line where you have a quota you've got to meet, those people over your quota, they have it timed out exactly. They know how many pieces, how many parts you can put out every day, and they know exactly what you ought to be able to do. And if you don't make that, then they're not happy with you. And so this was the idea Pharaoh had. Pharaoh and his taskmasters knew how many bricks Israel was making, and they knew what they were able to accomplish. And now to take this away from them has put a hard burden on the people. And so what happens next in verse 13, the taskmasters, again, notice, were urgent. They were persistent. They were speaking to the people, complete your work, your daily task each day as when there were straw. And the foremen of the people of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, why have you not done all your task of making bricks today and yesterday as in the past? So you notice another division. If we go back here to verse 10, you'll notice the taskmasters and the foremen work together in telling the people what they're to do. Remember, Pharaoh gave the command to both these people. Here we see the taskmasters and the foremen sort of put apart. The taskmasters were Egyptians. This is probably the Egyptian, or probably the role one of the Egyptians had when Moses killed him, was that when he beat a slave, there's a good possibility he may have been a taskmaster, that he was whipping a slave, trying to get him to work harder. That's usually one of the assumptions. And so they tell them, complete your work. You've got this daily task. You got to do this now, just as you did before. And then you notice verse 14, the foremen. Now again, the foremen were the Israelites. These were Hebrew men whom Pharaoh's taskmaster had set over them were beaten. So what we see here is it's not necessarily the people that are beaten, the slaves, but it's the foremen, the ones who are over them. And again, they asked them this I forgot exactly how you would call this question, but it's basically a question that they know the answer for, but it's more ridicule, more of reminding them of, hey, you've not done what you're supposed to do. Again, why have you not done all your tasks? Why haven't you made the bricks? Why have you failed today and yesterday? You should be able to do this. You've been doing it for a while, but now you're already stopping. What's happened to you? Why are you not doing this? Again, they know the answer. They know that the reason they're not able to do this is because they've taken away the straw, but they're not giving the Israelites any kind of a break. They're not giving them any kind of they're not being lax on them at all. And so verse 15, we see the foremen come. Now, again, the foremen come, and verse 15, then the foremen of the people of Israel came and cried to Pharaoh, why do you treat your servants like this? No straw was given to your servants, yet they say to us, make bricks. And behold, your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people. But he said, you are idle. You are idle. That is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Go and work. Go now and work. No straw will be given to you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks. Now, let's stop right there in verse 18 and go back. So the foremen of Israel come into Pharaoh. Again, do we see Pharaoh as being a hands-on man? He's only just seen Moses and Aaron face to face. Now he's seeing an Israelite slave come in, a foreman who's over him. And the foremen begin to ask, why do you treat your servants like this? Why do you not give a straw? And again, it's very interesting that the command was given a straw, but apparently the command that they were, something was missing here. They don't understand. They didn't connect that this is happening because of Moses and Aaron's request. And so they say that again, no straw is given to us, yet you say make more bricks. Your servants are beaten. And again, notice, but the fault is in your own people. The Israelites say it's not our fault. We were able to make bricks and do them like you wanted to until you took our straw away. Now you demand us to do this when we don't have straw. And then Pharaoh reveals to them why he's doing it. Again, notice the repetition. You are idle, or you are lazy. You are very lazy, some translations will say. That's an idea. You're idle, you're idle. That double repeating. You're lazy, you're very lazy. You're idle, you're very idle. Basically, what he's saying is you've got nothing better to do. And he knows what he goes on and said, that is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. He says, the only reason you dreamed up going out and worshiping your God is because you don't have anything to do, because your workload is too easy. You've got time to think. You've got time to figure out for yourself. And he says, therefore, go now and work. And he says, and again, he commands again, no straw will be given you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks. You still have to do this. And then you notice verse 19. Verse 19, the foreman of the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble when they said, you shall by no means reduce your number of bricks, your daily task each day. So they met Moses and Aaron, who were waiting for them, as they came out from Pharaoh. And they said, the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. Notice again, verse 19 or verse 20. Moses and Aaron are waiting. And again, the foreman of Israel knew they were in trouble. Well, verse 19, they knew they were in trouble because they would not reduce the number of bricks. They knew that they weren't going to reduce that number. They couldn't complete their job, and therefore they were going to be beaten. They were going to be tried every day. And so verse 20, Moses and Aaron are waiting for them. Now, exactly where they are, if they're waiting for them back in their land or they're waiting for them outside Pharaoh's house, we don't know. But they're waiting for them. And as soon as they come out, as soon as these foremen see Moses and Aaron, notice what they say. But they say, the Lord look on you and judge. The idea here, the Lord look on you and judge, is the idea of, Lord, may God look at what you've done and God visit this hardship upon you. May God bring an equal punishment. May God bring an equal doom on you that you have brought on us. And he also says, because you made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh. You made us an odor. You've made us a stench to Pharaoh, a stench that he doesn't want to have anything to do with. Before Pharaoh was with Israel, yes, he gave them a hard job. Yes, they were slaves, but they weren't mistreated this bad. And now they said, you made us a stink. And notice how bad they say it is. And they say, you have put a sword in their hands to kill us. They say, Moses, all you've done is you've come in and gave Pharaoh an easier way to kill us. Yes, Pharaoh was working us hard before, but he wasn't working us this impossible task. Now he's given us an impossible task to do, and you're going to kill us. You're going to let Pharaoh kill us. And then we see verse 21 or verse 22 and 23, the last few verses of this chapter. Then Moses turned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all. Notice the last few words of chapter 5. Moses comes back to God and basically says, God, why did you do this? God, why did you send me? God, I told you not to send me. I told you I didn't want to go. I told you Pharaoh wouldn't listen. I told you Pharaoh was going to do bad. I told you this was going to happen. Why did you send me? Why didn't you just leave me in the desert? Now you've brought the death of this people upon you. Then he knows verse 23. He says, basically, God, you sent me here to save the people. But all I've done since I've been here is cause the people to be under more and more hardship. And again, Moses says, you have not delivered your people at all. This is very telling to me. Number one, it tells me that Moses didn't quite listen to God. Remember last week in chapter 4, God told Moses, and God told him repeatedly, he's going to tell him repeatedly, Pharaoh's heart's going to be hardened. Pharaoh's not going to listen to you. It's not going to be easy. I'm going to have to show him who I am before he'll let you go. Moses knew that. But yet here you see Moses get down and out. Moses get upset and frustrated because God didn't work in his time. God didn't work. Moses expected to go to Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, okay, good, Moses, go on. He didn't expect the hardship. But here we see the insight, the knowledge, the ability of God, that God knew what was going to happen. It's very interesting. In chapter 5, we don't read God's response to Moses' claim to what Moses said. But in chapter 6, we're going to see God come back. We're going to see God show Moses and show Pharaoh the beginning signs of who he is. And we're going to see God begin to fulfill his word as we proceed through these next few chapters. But for tonight, we're going to stop right here.
And as we close, one last thing I thought about as I read this, I've often thought about our life. You know, how many times do we feel the way Moses does? Sometimes we give Moses and some of these guys a bad rap because we think, well, you should have known God was going to save you. Just give him time. No, Moses is about like us. You know, there's times in our lives when we have heartaches, we have hardships, we have difficulties, and we say, God, why did you let this happen? God, why did this happen to me? You said this wouldn't happen. Why is it happening? We have to hear the same answer Moses heard, the same answer Moses learned, and that is to wait. To wait. Because we're going to learn, as I said earlier, we're going to learn that God's time is not our time. God's time was not Moses' time. Moses expected to walk into Egypt, and Pharaoh said, you can have your people and go, and Moses walked right back out. God says it's going to take some time. You got to wait. You got to wait. It's coming, but you got to be patient. Same is true of us, and that's what I want us to see tonight, is that sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes we have to be patient. But we can know, just as in this account here, that God is there. God is in control. God will make it work out if we'll simply trust him, if we'll simply follow him, if we'll simply obey him. I thank you again for joining us this evening for our Wednesday night Bible class. I hope that you're all having a good day, a good week. Before we end, remember Sunday morning, we have our Sunday morning worship at 10 a.m. Anybody who can help us out or can be here, we appreciate that. Also, don't forget, as we said in our devotional and our bulletin, but don't forget that we have our Pineville. If you're going to bring supplies for Pineville, they need to be here by Sunday. There are baskets in our auditoriums, there are foyers to get those. We have, I think, canned tuna, canned chicken, spaghetti sauce, and gummy adult multivitamins that they've asked us to provide. So if you can help out with that, I know that would be a great help for them. Also, don't forget that Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, we have an elders, deacons, and preacher meeting. So those who are in those groups, please make sure you're here for that. Other than that, again, I hope everyone's doing well. I hope everyone is taking good care of themselves this week. Look forward to being with you again Sunday, and we hope to see you then. But for tonight, we're going to be done, and I hope that you all have a good night and a good rest of the week.